Hello and welcome to the Perpetual Traffic Podcast. This is your host, Ralph Burns. I'm the founder and CEO of Tier 11 alongside my amazing co-host,
Lauren E. Petrullo, founder of Mongoose Media.
Yeah, and today, thank you so much for joining us. It is a Friday. We are just airing our grievances about certain things that have happened this week. And what we're finding is that you, the Perpetual Traffic listener, you want the tactical stuff, and we will get to some of that. But the theme that we decided on for this coming month and quarter is about personal development. And I think last week's show, the show that we aired last Friday, this is being aired today on a Tuesday. Go back and listen to that episode because it was about a book that we discussed and sort of went into, not super deep, but just got the high level on, which is a book by Benjamin Hardy and Dan Kennedy, two really sharp dudes that wrote a book called 10X is Easier Than 2X. Not only is it a great title from a copywriter and a headline standpoint, because it's very intriguing because, it's counterintuitive. Once again, counterintuitive. Which I believe is actually in the title of that episode. Actually, no, you negated that. You took out the counterintuitive. The point is that 10X is easier than 2X is only easier if you find the right types of who's within your organization or outside of your organization so you can focus on your 20%. What we talked about and what Dan Sullivan talks about is your unique ability. And that's an ideal. It's an ideal to get there. I'm not saying that you should have done it by now in 4 days. But the point is this is something that I would really like you as a listener to think more and more about and double down on as much as possible. We're certainly doing that here. And it's about setting lofty goals. So big goals like 10X goals instead of 2X goals, because as soon as you set a 10X goal, all of a sudden your choices for what path you need to take become very limited. Because if it's a 2X or it's like, hey, I want to grow my business by 10% this year, there's literally infinite numbers of things you can do, and they might not be the right things. But if you want to make a radical shift and go really big, like a BHAG, as Jim Collins from Good to Great would say, you need all of a sudden the choices you need to make are fundamentally different, and chances are they're probably not the things that you're doing today. So that's one of the things that we did inside Tier 11 this past year, setting ourselves up for success, have lofty goals. I know you have lofty goals this year, personal income goals. Hopefully you're doing the same as a Perpetual Traffic listener. So it leads us to today's show, which is some of the frustrations and the bumps in the road on the way to achieving that goal. One of those things is for you to reach your income goal, which, if I'm not mistaken, is $1 million cash this year.
Yes.
You're not going to rob a bank or anything like that. That's good. It's going to come probably from your business or other businesses here. One of the things that you're trying to hire for right now is someone who can help you get to there. But it is not easy. You may or may not need to kiss a few frogs, as my old boss, Tom Davies, used to say. You got to kiss a few frogs before you find the princess. Literally, that's how he talks. I'm not kidding. And he was mean. Anyway, the point is you've had some challenges here. So what I'd like to do is sort of introduce the idea of the hiring process, how to find those people. And then we'll actually bring in some of our specialists. We have an HR specialist on staff at Tier 11 who does an extraordinary job of this. Figured out an entire system. I'm not saying our way is the absolute way, but it is a good way. It does minimize some of the mistakes, but we still make some errors along the way. There is no getting around it.
Right.
So tell us a little bit about the story that you were just telling me before we started to hit record today.
I guess to give some prefaces is there's definitely different ways you can recruit. Referrals will always be the number one resource for me. If you have someone that's willing to put their name on another individual's character and attitude, because I'll always hire for attitude over aptitude, that's the best. Doing self-recruitment can be exhausting. I've done Indeed, I've done lots of other recruiting channels, but I have found the most success, at least time-wise, has been using recruitment agencies. But what's really interesting is when you use a recruitment agency, you have the opportunity to expand your borders and you're doing all of these interviews virtually. on my goals, I'm opening a physical office in Orlando this year. So we'll be recruiting more individual and talent from that drive-in market so that they can work in our office. But not all positions need to be in person in the Orlando office. So something that I was telling you before the show to be mindful of, I'm gonna let's say this may happen, hypothetically, this is a possibility, okay?
Not that it ever did or never would. Got it.
All characters are based off of fictitious representations. Any relation to any real human people were on.
Surely
What
by
is the
chance.
disclaimer language you see before every video?
I used to have to read those disclaimers in my first job in advertising, actually. But yes,
No way, yeah.
It's
hypothetical
situations.
situations you might want to be aware of, and that you wouldn't necessarily think about, but it's fun situations. When you're interviewing using Zoom, Google Meets, some sort of video platform, what view do you look at, Ralph? How much of the individual do you see?
Pretty much it's chest up or shoulders above. Yeah.
Yeah. So if an individual has a physical disability and they're in a chair, you can't see it,
right,
which most of the times is no problem. But if you have a role that is physical and requires additional accommodations, I'm not saying that be an ableist in any capacity. It's something that you need to be aware of. If there are physical limitations, you can ask the proper questions of what can we do to accommodate going up and down this forklift? Or if you don't have an elevator, for example, that's a hypothetical situation.
Sure.
My dad had one leg, all right? Sitting down, he was 5'0". Standing up, he was 6'8.5" on one side, 5'4" on the other, right? Because he was missing half a leg. If you saw my stand-up, you would know. My mom has a 1 foot fetish. Oh yeah, there you go. Now you know why my dad had 1 foot. He lost it in the war. But so there were limitations when he was alive for certain jobs he could do. At his height, when you have someone that's 6'8.5" and you're asking them to crawl under he doesn't fit.
Yeah, he's not going to be a fighter pilot either. Chances are.
He was jumping out of planes.
He wouldn't fit. Maybe, yeah. Well, I don't even know if he'd be able to do that. But anyway, so the point is there are physical limitations. Everyone now is nearly 100% virtual, although some of the tech companies are going back to the office, making it a mandate. That's a whole other thing that we can discuss. But the point is a lot of the hiring process now is done virtually, and all you see is what you're seeing right now on our YouTube channel over at perpetualtraffic.com/YouTube. So
if you can't see more than chest up and you're hiring for a foot model, well, you can't see the feet. Right. Other situations that you might not hypothetically not be aware of is that if someone's water is going to break an hour after your interview,
could affect the hiring process.
It could affect attorneys. Right. The thing is, if you have someone, this is true no matter what. If someone has a planned vacation and you're in the hiring process and hey, look, I booked this cruise with my family. It's 2 weeks after your intended start date. I just need to signal to you that I will be unavailable because this was previously booked, right? Those type of situations and conversations happen normally. And when you know about someone's anticipated days that they'll have off, you can make a decision on if that's going to work for your company or not.
Right.
But if you're not able to see someone,
right to know.
Yeah, because if you're in the first 90 days, and depending on what your human resources team or your hiring documents or your employee handbooks say, usually the first 90 days is a trial period, and you're not taking off.
Let's just make sure we're clear on this. We are not saying that if someone is 8 months pregnant, you shouldn't hire them. But
100%, that's not what we're saying.
You have to have a practical. This is you're in business to make a profit. Okay, change the world, influence mankind in a positive way. Yes, but at the end of the day, no profit, no people. So you are in business to turn a profit, and you have to have full discourse when it comes to making that hiring decision. We did the same thing. We didn't realize it either. And somebody recently that was hired, we didn't realize they were 6 months pregnant. They should have told us. Now, we gave them, full maternity leave, did as
Yeah.
many right things as we possibly could do. But that put us in a huge competitive disadvantage. Not only that, but it cost us a lot of money, which, we checked with all the state regulations. Obviously, we're a virtual company, but it's like the applicant has the obligation, in my opinion, from an ethical standpoint, to divulge those details, which could
Yeah.
affect their work effectiveness. Did
I
I
would say
say
for the
that in a
first 90
legalese way?
days.
Yeah, 100%.
Again, if you have a vacation you've already planned and you don't disclose it, because this has happened before, hypothetically,
Sure.
right? Someone will take off 2 weeks after they started and like request time off. And you're like, whoa, what? This is in your first 90-day period. Oh, I've had this booked before. It's like, this just was poor communication up front. Most of the time, like the individual, like not most of the time, if you're hiring someone and that person's a right fit, I can't speak for all employers, but I would assume 90% are like, heck yeah, I'm willing to wait. You communicated effectively. But if you're not aware of those types of limitations, you might find yourself in a situation where they're not being honest with you. They're underperforming because they're hiding, they're stressed, potentially, hypothetically, if they've delivered a baby 2 days before they started working with you. Stress may cause them challenges in producing milk. Stress may cause, like they're not sleeping. There's a lot that goes to it. And
Productivity at work.
100%. And
all of those things
yeah,
need to be divulged. I think one of the, like a takeaway on this is a simple question that can be asked. And, before the world of virtual interviews, this was sort of more apparent, I think, because you could see the physical potential limitations. Like, we're just using this as an example, is that you might want to consider asking the question, is there anything that we haven't discussed so far that would hinder your ability to do work within the next 90 to 120 days at Mongoose Media?
Correct.
And if they
What
say
a great question.
no, they are lying.
Well, they may not think they're lying. Like, to be fair, like, you don't know your own physical limitations. Like, you can't foresee if someone were to get a medical diagnosis. Someone we've worked with, someone got shortly after hiring a unknown, very like small, limited medical diagnosis so you can't know what you don't know, but you have to disclose stuff that you know. Like, if you have a vacation that is booked in your first 90 to 120 days that you know you're going to be out of the office for, if there's political turmoil in your current environment where you may not have access to electricity, power, or internet, and you know this to be true, that's something you should disclose. Things of that nature. I think that question you pose is there anything in the next 90 to 120 days that we have not discussed that could limit you from fulfilling your duties to your full potential? Like, are there any restraints that we need to be aware of? Because I will tell you again, most of the time when you find that good candidate, that prince or princess, if you will, because you've kissed a lot of frogs before, I believe most business owners are like, heck yes, we will work. Let's accommodate together. Because when you have a business owner that is willing and able to understand, yeah, you've got this 10-year family reunion. How amazing. Okay, we recognize it. Let's either push your hiring date back to after it starts, or let's just make sure we all know that there's this 2-week period and let's accommodate your training schedule.
Yeah.
Most of the time, it's like when you find the person you want, business owners are willing to make accommodations and to find ways that could work. Physical limitations, like if you don't have feet, but you're doing a foot model. Okay, do you have like prosthetic feet, or do you have access to someone else's feet? It's a conversation. It's not like a deal breaker, I think most of the time. But what is a deal breaker for me is that subterfuge, that intentional hiding of imperative information that can affect your performance, because then you're like, why isn't this individual performing as well? I don't understand. What happened?
Yeah. And it seems like you hire a lot of foot models at Mongoose Media. Interesting. But the point is like, this is a question that is a good question to ask at the end. We're talking about sort of the tail end of the interviewing process. The question that I always ask prior to actually making an offer is, if I offered you the job today, would you say yes?
Oh.
And because that way I know I have somebody who's interested, and I don't necessarily listen to the response, whether it's yes or no. I listen to how they respond. If they
Mm.
hesitate, I know I have a problem. And then if they hesitate, if they say yeah, or if they immediately say yes, absolutely. Like you've already talked about money. All right. They know what the salary range is. You haven't given them the offer yet. Let's say the salary range, I never tell them this is what you're going to make. This is the range. Usually go a little bit lower because they end up wanting a higher end of the range. That's just a little tactic that I've used for years and years. The point is like everybody thinks, well, if the range is $5,000 to $7,000 a month, well, I'm worth 7,000, of course. However, what I might say is that when we're talking about money, I'm like, all right, the range is $5,000 to $7,000. You don't quite have the expertise and the level of seniority for the $7,000 range. I will do everything I can in order to fight for you. Like I'm the CEO now, so it's a little bit different. I was a hiring manager. I was like, I can go to the CEO, I can go to HR and fight on your behalf. However,
Mm-hmm.
I wouldn't expect that, but something in that middle part of the range, how does that sound? And then if they say that's great, then you say, all right, well, based on everything that we've talked about so far, this is sales 101, really. Is there anything that would prevent you from starting with us? Or if we offered you the job today, would you take it? And if they say yes immediately, then you know you've got your hire. Chances are it's not 100% foolproof. The corollary to that question is the one that we asked before, is like you want to sort of know that through the process. You might want to drop that in during your interview somewhere so that you at least know. So the woman that we hired that was 6 months pregnant, like she didn't tell us.
Mm.
And I had a real problem with that. And everything worked out fine. Like we probably overpaid her in the end. Point is, she was in the U.S., so we complied with all the regulatory laws and all the other sorts of stuff that you have to go through. The point is, like, you should tell your employer, and it doesn't necessarily. If she told me, I would have been like, fine, because she was a great candidate. So we
Yeah.
thought. So the point is that like that immediately dropped down in the level of trust. And I look at trust as the foundational concept
Mm-hmm.
everyone who's going to work with you. If you do
Yes.
not have that, you have got nothing. And I wrote a book on this called Virtual Boss. We'll leave a link in the show notes. There's not a huge section on hiring. There's a whole other book on hiring, which I haven't written yet. The point is that you've got to place deposits in the trust account as a manager, as a hiring
Yeah.
manager, as much as possible, because you're eventually going to start to withdraw them. But you, as the employee, should be doing the same because it's a two-way street. It's not what can I get out of the company? It's like, what can I give to the company and what can I get in return so that they get what they want? And that when you have those two things together, like that's all based on trust. And it sounds like in your interviewing process here, that trust was immediately broken. Thankfully, you had a recruitment
Hypothetically,
agency. Hypothetically,
it would be broken.
and if you go through an agency, the agency is actually the one that does the dirty work for you and
Yeah,
finds it, which is helpful. So,
for sure. So that's where it's like leaning on agencies I've found to be super helpful. Like in the past, of a real example I'm happy to share is like I had an individual who told me like she's engaged and she's going to have a wedding in the next 4 months. So she told me right out
yeah,
the gate. So I was like,
it's great.
cool. That means there's a wedding, there's a honeymoon, and there's going to be the like 2 weeks before the wedding, she's going to be useless.
Yeah.
And she's going to be off. So we had that discussion of like, okay, you told me this. Totally fine. That's amazing. I can't wait to celebrate with you. Let's make sure that does this make sense of the time off you would need for the wedding? Because I'm not asking you to push it. You're a great candidate. I want to move forward. And you've established clear communication and trust, which speaks volumes to me. And so I was like, yeah, okay, great. How long's the honeymoon? What are the plans? I think you should take 3 days off before the wedding so you can handle and get ready. So we had said that. She had just said she wanted the day of the wedding. And I was like, I think you should do 3. She said maybe 1 day. I was like, this is not negotiable. You're taking 3 days off because you never know what's going to come up last minute.
Right.
And I can tell you that an individual worked with me for 2 years.
It's great.
And the trust we built with each other was, hey, thank you so much because I didn't know I needed those 3 days because there was stuff with in-law. Anyway, long story short is, I think the way you phrase that question is amazing. And if anyone listening has encountered hypothetical situations, like we've discussed or other scenarios, I'd love if you're listening on Spotify to leave a comment, or if you're on YouTube to tell us about your experience, because there are new challenges that aren't like super discussed. Ralph, I've talked about like a remote like dress code that you have to do because we're all showing up online. Again, I don't care. You're chest up. So you might be wearing a skirt, underwear, pants. This isn't like a no pants, no shoes, no service situation, but there's lots of those tweaks.
How'd you know I was wearing a skirt?
I thought it was a skort.
Skort. Well, actually, yeah, it is a skort.
There we go. But I'm sure there's listeners here that have encountered similar experiences, and like,
absolutely.
I'd love to know what situations you've done, or if there's anything that you have found helpful in ensuring that you've got good culture fit, good potential, and prospecting, because asking for a friend.
Asking for a friend. Absolutely. Well, this is just, I think, one small subset of the whole process of the who, not how theme that we want to sort of talk about here, setting bigger goals, going 10x instead of 2x. 10% isn't very exciting, but 10x is exciting. The only way to make your present better is to make your future bigger. And we're big believers in that, even though I forget that phrase every now and then, Lauren. But anyway, just going to stamp that like right on my desk.
Tattooed on your finger?
Tattoo it on my finger, like this finger right here, right there. Nice place for it. And this is all a part of that. So what we're going to do is we're going to actually do more episodes here, and let us know in the comments, wherever you listen to podcasts, if you find this helpful and useful. This is just sort of a day in the life of hiring. And as an entrepreneur, whether you're a director of a department, or you're a one-man band hiring your first person, like your first VA, like this is the kind of stuff that you really need to look at in order to 10x yourself in the coming year. We will bring on our HR specialist onto the show. I've actually asked him last year, our head of people and culture, Josh Hill, and we'll go through that whole process, as well as we'll get into a lot of the hiring techniques that I've used through the years. I've literally interviewed and hired hundreds and probably thousands of interviews. So there is all that we can tap into here. So anyway, as you move forward in your journey, best of luck in hiring. This is sort of the tail end of it. We're going to talk a lot more about this in the coming weeks and months. So wherever you listen to podcasts, make sure that you comment and leave a rating. And of course, you can get all the show notes and everything that we talked about here today over at perpetualtraffic.com. So on behalf of my awesome co-host, Lauren E. Petrullo, MBA.
Ciao.
Till next show. See ya.